All right, get ready to swing into action, because today we are diving headfirst into the world of Spider-Man.
Your emails have been absolutely amazing. Origin stories, epic showdowns, even some seriously obscure Spidey facts you've really outdone yourself.
You guys know how to give us homework. But seriously, we're diving deep into the web slinger, but more than that, we really want to understand why this character, after all these years, still has such a grip on our imaginations.
Right. I mean, decades of comics, movies, TV shows. There's got to be something special about this guy.
So let's start with the obvious, right? Radioactive Spider, Peter Parker, boom, Spider-Man. But it can't just be about the powers, can it? What makes this origin story really stick?
I think it's because Peter Parker, at his core, is such a relatable guy.
In what way?
Well, he isn't some billionaire with gadgets or an alien. I mean, he's a kid from Queens. Awkward, a bit of an outcast, dealing with stuff we've all been through.
You're talking about the whole science whiz thing, right?
Total science nerd, bullied, trying to figure out his place. His life is kind of a mess. And then he gets these powers, which, let's be honest, most of us would freak out about.
Oh, absolutely. But the best part, he doesn't instantly know what to do with them. Tries to use them to make a quick buck.
The whole wrestling thing, right?
Yeah.
Even designs his own costume, which, spoiler alert, looks a lot like his future Spidey suit, but he gets taken advantage of, learns a tough lesson about power.
Like he's got this incredible ability, but he's still just a kid, figuring it out as he goes.
Exactly, and I think that's what makes him so appealing. It's the idea that anyone could be under the mask, dealing with those same struggles.
Which brings us, of course, to the famous line, with great power comes great responsibility. But you know I love a good origin story, even for a quote. And this one's got a bit of a twist, right? Because it wasn't Uncle Ben who actually said it first.
Okay, you did your homework, you're right. That line, which has become like the Spider-Man motto, didn't come from Uncle Ben in the comics.
No. So where'd it come from?
Believe it or not, it was just part of the narration at the end of Amazing Fantasy #15, like a lesson learned at the end of the story.
Wow. And somehow it just became so connected to Uncle Ben over the years.
It's really interesting how these things happen, right? Like, our collective memory kind of rewrites things. The quote itself, even if it wasn't from Ben originally, perfectly captures what Peter learns from his uncle's death.
It's almost like we needed it to be from Uncle Ben, even if it wasn't originally written that way.
And let's be real, the 2002 movie, with Uncle Ben saying those words, that solidified it for a whole generation.
It's wild, right? This one line, kind of ambiguous origins, but it's become a defining principle.
Shows you the power of these stories, how they change and adapt over time. But some things just stick with us.
It's true. And, you know, speaking of things that stick with us, we got to talk about those villains.
Oh, yeah. Spidey's Rogues Gallery is legendary.
Seriously. Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Venom. I mean, these aren't just your average bank robbers. These guys are the real deal. What is it about them that works so well?
It's more than just cool powers and costumes, right? They tap into something deeper. Often they're like these embodiments of specific fears or anxieties.
Okay, I see that. Like Doc Ock, right? Genius scientist.
Yeah.
But he's got this tragic backstory, those mechanical arms. He makes me think about technology, but like, what happens when it goes too far?
Oh, totally. Like that time he almost melted down the whole city with that fusion reactor experiment. I mean, it speaks to that fear of losing control, right? Our own creations turning on us.
Which, let's be honest, is pretty relevant today. So when you think about AI and all that.
Right. And then you've got the Green Goblin, who I think really embodies that whole duality thing.
Yeah, Norman Osborn's successful businessman, has a family, and then there's this whole other side.
The Goblin, it's like this battle between good and evil, but inside one person. And that look, that laugh, pure nightmare fuel. Fun fact, did you know that mask was inspired by a movie prop?
Seriously, no way.
Yeah, Stan Lee saw it somewhere and thought it was terrifying.
That just makes it even creepier. Okay, but we can't forget Venom. I mean, talk about facing your demons, right? That whole idea of this alien thing taking over, making you stronger, but also worse.
Venom is pure loss of control. That fear of our darker impulses taking charge, and the fact that his origin is tied to Spider-Man adds a whole other level.
It's like all of these villains, they reflect different aspects of Spider-Man, but twisted.
Exactly, like paths not taken, different sides of the same coin. And it's not just their personalities either, the way they operate, their motivations, it's all evolved over time.
You're right, like in the beginning it was a lot of mad scientists, right?
Yeah.
But then as time went on, you started to get villains motivated by corporate greed, political corruption.
It became a lot more real world, right? Which I think is interesting because it keeps things relevant.
Yeah.
Spider-Man's world is fantastical, but it's also grounded in these real anxieties.
Makes you think, huh? Okay, so we've talked about the villains, but we can't forget about the other side of things.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, this hero has had his fair share of romantic drama.
Oh man, are you kidding? It's like a Spider-Man soap opera sometimes.
Right. You've got Gwen Stacy first love, tragic ending. Then there's Mary Jane, the one who really becomes his rock, eventually his wife.
And you can't forget Black Cat. Always keeps things interesting, that's for sure. But each one, it's like they bring out a different side of him.
They ground him, you know? Remind us that even with all this power, he's still looking for love, connection, that normalcy that his life just doesn't have. And talk about some of those storylines. I mean, the Clone Saga, that was a wild ride. Imagine thinking you might not even be the real you.
Clones, genetic shenanigans, everyone questioning their identity.
Yeah.
It was a lot, maybe a little too much at times, but hey, people were talking about it, so it definitely kept you guessing.
But it does make you think about what makes Spider-Man who he is, right?
Okay.
And speaking of things that change him forever, we got to talk about Gwen Stacy's death. I mean, that was a turning point, right? Showed that even heroes can't outrun consequences.
Yeah, and it wasn't just some random plot device. It was this huge moment for Peter, for the readers, even for the writers. It's like suddenly the stakes were real. There was loss, there was grief, and it stuck with him.
You're right, it wasn't something you just bounce back from. It changed how we saw Spider-Man. Speaking of which, there's this whole other aspect, right? It's not just villains, it's the weight of being Spider-Man, the sacrifices.
Oh, absolutely. The constant struggle, trying to balance his personal life with being a hero, always paying a price.
It's like that one story, right?
Yeah.
Where I don't want to spoil anything, but he makes this deal to save someone he loves. It gets kind of dark, but it's such a powerful question, you know. What would you sacrifice?
Right, like how far would you go? It's a question that's haunted him, and I think it's something a lot of us think about in our own lives, even without the superpowers.
It's true, it's true. Okay, but you know me, gotta lighten things up. I gotta bring up some of this trivia you found. I mean, some of this stuff is gold. For example, did you know that the spider that bit Peter, in the very first comic, they called it an insect?
Yeah, even Stan Lee admitted that one was a bit of a goof. But hey, it's a good story now.
It really is. Okay, but get this. There's a theory that his costume, the whole red and blue thing, might have been inspired by an old Halloween costume, like from way before Spider-Man even existed.
I saw those pictures. It's uncanny. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's subconscious inspiration. But you gotta admit, it's kind of perfect.
You start to see how these things build on each other, you know, like all these little pieces, and they become this iconic character.
And we haven't even gotten into retcons.
But refresh my memory, what's a retcon again?
Oh, right. So a retcon, it's short for retroactive continuity, basically when writers go back and change something that happened in the past.
Oh, right, like maybe they tweak a character's backstory or something.
Exactly. It can be jarring for some readers, but it lets them keep things fresh, you know? Introduce new ideas, connect things in different ways. It's how these characters stay relevant even after all these years.
So even though we have all these sources, all this history, it's not like Spider-Man is ever really finished. It's a story that keeps evolving.
And that's the amazing part. It's a testament to everyone who's worked on these stories, the artists, the writers, the fans. They all contribute to this myth that just keeps growing.
So we've covered a lot, right? From radioactive spiders to tragic romances to the very nature of power and responsibility.
We really went deep. But I think we've shown that Spider-Man, he endures because he represents something universal. He's us, even with the mask and the powers.
He's the hero we all kind of hope we could be, you know? But also the guy who messes up, who doubts, who struggles.
Yeah.
Just like all of us.
Exactly. And on that note, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about. But before you swing away, we have one last question for you. Who is your favorite Spider-Man villain? What is it about them that resonates with you? Let us know.
Until next time, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Spider-Verse.